The email arrived at 2:17 a.m., a single venomous bite in the digital silence of Lucas Kohler's sterile Frankfurt apartment. He'd been staring at the rain-streaked window, nursing a glass of whiskey that tasted more of memory than grain. The subject line was blank. The sender, a ghost address generated from a public library terminal in his hometown. He almost deleted it. He should have. Instead, he clicked. There was no text, just two files. The first, an audio clip, Piper song WAV. The second, an image, Kreidezeichnung.jpg. His hand, steady enough to talk a man with a bomb vest off a ledge, began to shake. He clicked the audio file. It wasn't the jaunty, irritating tune from the tourist shops. This was a dissonant, reedy melody played on a wooden flute, thin and insidious. It slid under his skin, a melody that felt older than the city it was born from. Woven beneath it, almost imperceptible, was a low-frequency hum that made the fillings in his teeth ache. It was a sound designed not to be heard, but to be times-felt times, a visceral thrum of anxiety. He slammed the laptop shut, the melody still echoing in the room. His breath came in ragged bursts. It was the exact same melody from the Heidelberg case. The one that had ended with 3 dead students and his career in flames. The one that had earned him the moniker, the man who let the prophet win. With a sense of grim finality, he opened the image file. It was a photograph of a chalk drawing on pavement. A crude stick-figure Piper, impossibly tall and gaunt, leading a line of smaller figures away from a cluster of houses and into a dark, swirling vortex representing a forest. The style was childish, but the implication was ancient and terrifying. Lucas drained his whiskey. 5 years. 5 years he'd spent in the wilderness of private consultancy, analyzing corporate security risks and predicting market volatility. Safe, sterile work for a man haunted by the catastrophic unpredictability of the human soul. He'd sworn he would never go back. Not to the Kriminalpolizei, and certainly not to Hamelin. But the text that followed the email, a frantic message from his estranged sister Lena, left him no choice. Asterisk Lucas, it's Clara. She's gone. She and a dozen other kids. The police found this chalk drawing. Please. I know we haven't talked, but you're the only one. Please come home. Asterisk Clara, his niece. A bright, cynical 16-year-old with her mother's stubbornness and, he feared, his own vulnerability to the siren call of a perfect, promised world. Home, the word was ash in his mouth. Hamelin, the city that had devoured his childhood best friend Matthias 30 years ago in a case the papers had morbidly dubbed the Piper's Echo. A case that had never been solved. A case that had set him on the path to becoming a profiler in the first place. The Piper had always been waiting for him. Hamelin was a fairy tale choking on its own kitsch. The medieval half-timbered houses leaned together over cobbled streets, their facades painted in cheerful pastels. Every shop window displayed a grotesque menagerie of Piper memorabilia. Sugar rats, wooden flutes, felt hats with garish feathers. Tourists milled about, snapping photos of the Rattenfänger house, oblivious to the cloying scent of fear that had settled over the town like morning fog. For Lucas, it was a technicolor nightmare. Chief Inspector Schmidt, a man whose face seemed to have been carved from weathered oak, met him at the small, overwhelmed police station. They'd known each other since childhood. Schmidt had been the one to find Lucas hiding in the woods the day Matthias vanished. "I shouldn't have called you, Kohler," Schmidt said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. He gestured to a corkboard covered in the smiling faces of the missing teenagers. Clara's defiant, intelligent gaze stared back at Lucas. "But you see what we're dealing with. It's not just runaways. It's an evaporation." "Tell me about him," Lucas said, his voice flat, professional. The profiler, taking over from the terrified uncle. "We don't know who he is. He calls himself Jonas." Schmidt tossed a thin folder onto the table. "Appeared about 6 months ago. Street musician. Youth activist. Charismatic as hell. He talks about corporate greed, environmental collapse, the failures of the older generation. He offers them an alternative, a community, a cult. Lucas corrected. He's careful, never breaks the law outright. His rallies are framed as artistic happenings. His music is hypnotic. Kids who were once withdrawn, angry, suddenly become placid, devoted. Parents are terrified. They say he's stealing their children's souls right in front of them. Lucas looked at the image of the chalk drawing pinned to the board. He's weaponizing our town's myth. And he's using modern tools, Schmidt added, pointing to a printout of a social media page. It was a closed group, its posts filled with cryptic phrases and memes about following the song and leaving the plague behind. The plague, Lucas knew, was them, the adults, the world. I need everything you have on the legend, Lucas said. Not the tourist version. The academic, psychological truth of it. Schmidt nodded grimly. There's only one person for that. Dr. Schmidt. No relation, he added with a grimace. She runs the museum. Knows more about the Piper than the man himself. The Hamlin Museum was a mausoleum of folklore. Dr. Anja Schmidt was its high priestess. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to dissect him as he walked into her archive office. The room smelled of old paper and lemon tea. Lucas Kohler, she said, her voice crisp. The prodigal profiler returns. I followed the Heidelberg case. A tragedy. You understood the methodology of the charismatic leader, but you underestimated his mythic power. The criticism was so direct, it almost felt like a compliment. You've read my file. I read everything, she replied, gesturing to shelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound books and academic journals. The Piper is not a children's story, Herr Kohler. It's a case study in mass psychogenic illness. A historical account of a charismatic figure preying on a populace suffering from post-famine trauma and ergot poisoning. The music was likely a catalyst, not a cause. The real magic was manipulation. She walked him through the archives, her passion for the subject a palpable force. She showed him medieval woodcuts, psychological analyses, and sociological treatises. She theorized that the original Piper was likely a recruitment agent for the Children's Crusade or a similar movement, one who knew how to exploit the specific anxieties of the time. He offered them an escape, Anja explained, her fingers tracing the faded ink of a 14th century manuscript. He didn't drag them away. He convinced them to leave. He made it their idea. The most powerful form of control is the one the subject believes is their own free will. Lucas felt a cold dread crystallize in his gut. This wasn't just background information. This was a playbook. This man, Jonas, Lucas said, holding up a blurry photo from a street rally. Have you seen him? Anja studied the image. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. Yes, I think so. He's attended a few of my public lectures. Very intense young man. Asked incredibly specific questions about the psychological conditioning elements of the legend. I thought he was a postgraduate student. He was particularly interested in my paper on the use of resonant frequencies in folk rituals. Lucas froze. Resonant frequencies? Yes, she said, warming to her subject. There's a theory that certain low-frequency sounds, infrasound, can induce feelings of anxiety, dread, or even euphoria. It's possible the original Piper used a specific type of flute or drum that produced these frequencies, creating a back-create state of heightened suggestibility in the children. Purely academic. Of course. Asterisk. Of course. Asterisk. Lucas's blood ran cold. The hum beneath the melody. It wasn't magic. It was acoustics. It was science, twisted into a weapon. Over the next 2 days, Lucas immersed himself in the digital and physical ghost of Jonas. He was a phantom. No records, no tax ID, no past. But his presence was everywhere. He had built a network of alienated teenagers, communicating through encrypted apps and private servers. He never showed his face clearly in videos, always filming from behind or in shadow, letting his voice and his music do the work. The voice was calm, reasonable, seductive. It spoke of a world free from the hypocrisy of adults, a new Eden where they would be the architects of their own future. He found Clara's journal, hidden beneath her mattress. The early entries were filled with typical teenage angst, frustration with school, arguments with her parents. But then, a shift. The entries became euphoric, filled with references to the song and Jonas's truth. Asterisk, he sees us. Asterisk, she had written. Asterisk, he doesn't want to fix us. He wants to set us free. The music makes it all clear. The old world is sick, and we are the cure. We have to be brave enough to leave the plague behind. Asterisk. It was the exact rhetoric of the Heidelberg Prophet. The same promise of liberation that had led 3 students to chain themselves to a gas main and immolate themselves, believing they were ascending to a higher plane. Lucas's failure wasn't just a professional stain, it was a gaping wound. He had tried to reason with the prophet, to negotiate with a man who had built his own reality. He had treated it like a hostage situation when it had been a theological war. He wouldn't make that mistake again. He needed to find their new Eden. The police had scoured every abandoned warehouse and squat in the city. Nothing. Jonas was smarter than that. He was a true believer, and true believers build temples, not hideouts. He had to think like Jonas. He had to think like the Piper. Where would the Piper lead the children? Not away from Hamelin, but times underneath times it. He returned to Anja Schmidt's office late at night, a terrible suspicion hardening in his mind. He didn't call. He just appeared, a shadow in her doorway. She was working, surrounded by books, a single lamp illuminating her desk. "Dr. Schmidt," he began, his voice low. "Your papers, the ones you gave me. I hope they were helpful." "They were," Lucas said, placing a sheaf of printouts on her desk. They were pages from her own published articles, with sections highlighted in yellow. "You wrote about the Piper leading the children into the mountain. You theorized it was a metaphor for a subterranean journey, a psychological rebirth, a common trope in hero myths. Yes. And in this paper," he continued, adding another to the pile, "you discuss the appropriation of folklore during the Cold War, how the forests around Hamelin were honeycombed with secret military installations, bunkers, communications hubs, places designed to survive the apocalypse." Anja looked at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "A historical curiosity. One of your papers was titled The Piper's Echo, Modern Sanctuaries and the Mythology of Disappearance. In it, you mapped every known abandoned bunker in the Weserbergland region. You described them as modern caves, perfect locations for a charismatic leader to create a self-contained, isolated society. A new Eden." He saw the realization dawn in her eyes, a slow, sickening wave of horror. Her academic passion, her life's work, had been a roadmap for a monster. "Oh God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "That young man, the student, he asked for a copy of that specific paper." Lucas felt a pang of pity for her. She was not a villain, but an unwitting accomplice, a tragic victim of her own intellectual obsession. She was the one who had handed the Piper his flute. "There is one location," she said, her voice trembling as she pointed to a specific point on the map. "An old NATO communications bunker, built into Köterberg Mountain. It was decommissioned in the 90s. It's isolated, self-sufficient, and acoustically sealed. If someone wanted to create an echo chamber, both literally and figuratively, that's where they would go. The final night of the Rattenfänger Festival was in full swing. From the slopes of Köteberg, the town of Hamelin was a distant constellation of joyful light. The cheerful oompa of a brass band drifted on the wind, a grotesque counterpoint to the thrumming low-frequency hum that grew stronger as Lucas approached the coordinates. The entrance to the bunker was a blast door hidden behind a curtain of overgrown ivy. It was slightly ajar. Lucas slipped inside, his pistol a cold, heavy weight in his hand. The air was cool and smelled of damp concrete, ozone, and incense. A long concrete tunnel sloped down into the earth, lit by flickering candles placed in wall niches. And everywhere, there was the music. The reedy flute melody was no longer just in his ears. It was in his bones. It pulsed from hidden speakers, a constant, hypnotic presence. The infrasound component was much stronger here, creating a physical pressure in his chest, a sense of deep, irrational dread mixed with a strange, compelling calm. This was the heart of the beast. The tunnel opened into a vast central chamber. It had once been a command center, but now it was a makeshift temple. Wires and servers were draped with tapestries. Tactical maps on the walls were covered with the same childish chalk drawings. And in the center, a dozen teenagers, including Clara, sat in a meditative circle. They were dressed in simple gray tunics, their faces placid, their eyes unfocused. On a raised platform at the far end of the room stood Jonas. He was younger than Lucas expected, maybe late 20s, with a mess of dark hair and the burning, incandescent eyes of a true believer. He wasn't playing a flute. The music was pre-recorded, broadcast from a sophisticated sound system wired into the bunker's old infrastructure. He held a microphone, his voice smooth and resonant, weaving the story for his flock. "And so the old world will burn in its own corruption," Jonas was saying, his voice a calm, hypnotic river. "But you, the pure, the chosen, will follow the song to a new beginning. Tonight is the departure, a final, clean break. We will shed our old skins and be reborn." Lucas saw a series of canisters stacked near the platform. Nitrogen. Jonas wasn't planning an escape. He was planning a mass suicide. A final departure into oblivion, masked as ascension. It was Heidelberg all over again. Clara looked up, her eyes glassy. She saw Lucas, but there was no recognition. Only a faint, placid curiosity, as if he were a ghost from a world she no longer inhabited. "Lucas Kohler," Jonas said, a serene smile on his face. He'd seen him, the profiler, the agent of the plague world. "You have followed the song as well. Have you come to join us?" Lucas knew force was useless. A single gunshot would trigger their martyrdom. He couldn't fight Jonas. He had to dismantle him. He had to break the spell. "I've come for my niece," Lucas said, his voice steady, projecting across the chamber. "She is not your niece anymore," Jonas replied gently. "She is a child of the song, as are they all." "You cannot understand." "Oh, I understand," Lucas said, holstering his weapon in a slow, deliberate movement. "I understand the infrasound broadcast at 19 Hz to induce a state of anxiety. I understand the binaural beats in the music to encourage a trance state. I understand the rhetoric of alienation and promised utopia. It's a very old playbook." He took a step forward. Jonas's smile tightened. "These are just tools. The truth they reveal is real." Lucas had to find the source. He scanned the room, his profiler's eye, cataloging every detail. The main broadcast system was on the platform with Jonas, but the infrasound that required specific, powerful transducers. He spotted them 4 large black boxes mounted in the corners of the room, disguised as part of the old ventilation system. He needed a diversion. "I know you, Jonas," Lucas said, his voice changing, taking on the intimate, knowing tone of a negotiator. Or should I say, Tobias Richter, from Leipzig. Your father owned a small electronics repair shop. It failed. You told everyone he was a genius the world wasn't ready for. The placid smile vanished from Jonas's face. A flicker of shock, of human anger, replaced it. A few of the teenagers stirred, their trances disturbed by the shift in their leader's tone. You know nothing, Jonas hissed. I know he drank himself to death. Lucas pressed on, moving slowly, casually, toward the nearest transducer. And I know your mother left you. You drifted. You found solace not in people, but in frequencies, in the power of sound to manipulate emotion. You weren't chosen by a higher power, Tobias. You were just a lonely, brilliant boy who was terrified of being abandoned again. So you decided to build a family that could never leave you. He was close now. The box had a simple control panel on its side, a single, large power switch. Lies! Jonas shrieked, his composure shattering. I am the Piper! I am their salvation! As Jonas screamed, Lucas slammed his hand down on the switch. The visceral hum that had permeated the bunker vanished. The pressure in the air dissipated. The change was profound and instantaneous. It was like a thick fog had been lifted. The flute music continued, but now it was just a strange, reedy melody. The magic was gone. The teenagers blinked, their expressions shifting from placid euphoria to confusion. Clara shook her head slightly, her eyes finding Lucas again. This time, a flicker of recognition. Uncle Lucas? She whispered, her voice frail. The spell was broken. Jonas saw the shift. He saw the doubt spreading across the faces of his followers. His power, so absolute a moment ago, was evaporating into the cold concrete air. He was no longer a mythic figure. He was just Tobias Richter, a failed man from Leipzig, standing on a stage in a concrete box. He lunged for the nitrogen canisters, his face a mask of desperation. We can still leave! The departure is now! But Lucas was already moving. He wasn't a negotiator anymore. He was a protector. He tackled Jonas, a clean, hard impact that sent them both sprawling. The microphone skittered across the floor, screeching with feedback. The teenagers flinched, truly awake now, the sound of reality ugly and jarring. Jonas didn't fight back. He lay on the floor, curled into a ball, weeping. The Piper was gone. All that was left was the hollow man who had worn his mask. They emerged from the bunker into the cold, gray light of dawn. The town's festival was over. A sanitation truck was making its rounds in the distance, a mundane, reassuring sound. Clara was wrapped in his jacket, shivering, leaning against him as if he were the only solid thing in the world. The other teenagers huddled together, their gray tunics looking cheap and foolish in the morning light, their faces etched with the shame and terror of their near departure. Chief Inspector Schmidt and his officers were waiting. They took Jonas Tobias into custody. He didn't resist. He was silent, his eyes vacant, the messianic fire extinguished. Lucas looked at Clara. The hypnotic placidity was gone, replaced by a deep, aching confusion. The deprogramming would be long and difficult. The wounds Jonas had inflicted were not physical, but they were deep. He said he loved us, she whispered, her voice choked with tears. He said he would keep us safe. He loved the idea of you, Lucas said softly, pulling her closer. He didn't want to save you. He just wanted you to be as lost as he was. He looked back at the mountain, a dark, silent mass against the pale sky. For 30 years, he had been haunted by the ghost of the Piper, by the mystery of his lost friend, by the echo of a song he could never fully hear. He had imagined a monster of mythic proportions, a supernatural force of evil, but the truth was so much more banal. and so much more terrifying. The monster wasn't a legend. It was a man. A broken man who had learned to twist a children's story into a weapon, who had found the precise frequency of human loneliness and amplified it until it drowned out everything else. Lucas had returned to Hamelin to fight a ghost from his past. He had not found a monster in the mountain. He had found a pathetic, broken man in a concrete room, and in defeating him, he had finally, after a lifetime of running, silenced the Piper's song within himself. The echo was gone. There was only the quiet, cold morning, and the heavy weight of his niece safe in his arms.